You're back on talkSPORT Endzone, talkSPORT's dedicated NFL YouTube channel with myself, Will Varney. The draft is nearly upon us next week out in Green Bay. The first round gets underway next Thursday. We can't wait. All of the mocks, all of the predictions, we can put them in the bin and we can finally see where players are going to be ending up. Just a reminder, on the channel right now, we've got loads of fantastic content, lots of team previews, looking at what their needs are, if they're to be competitive next season, how important the draft is going to be for them as well. So make sure to like, subscribe. Also, leave us your comments. We love to see your interactions on the channel. And it leads us today to focus on the Dallas Cowboys. Such a polarizing organization, always making the headlines, aren't they? But how important is this year's draft going to be if they're going to be competitive next season with a new head coach as well? Pleasure to say, RJ Ochoa, who is the editor of Blogging the Boys, joins me here on talkSPORT Endzone. RJ, how are you, my man? You well?
I'm doing great, Will. It's great to be with you. Big fans of talkSPORT, both for NFL and obviously Premier League coverage. You guys are the gold standard. So it's awesome to be here. It's exciting with the NFL draft underway and kind of a relief because this is such a nerve-wracking time of year. And so as exciting as it is, I think you're always happy when it's over and you can start to kind of unwrap the new toys and figure out exactly where
Exactly that.
they're going to
And
fit on the roster.
it is a bit of a guessing game, and we're nearly at that point now where we can find out, where players are going to be ending up and all these different positional needs. Will it be a first rounder? Would they use a second rounder on him? We're going to be getting into some of that, RJ. But first, I wanted to ask you about where the Cowboys are right now. It's been a bit of a tumultuous offseason. I mentioned there a new head coach in the building in Brian Schottenheimer, an appointment that I think is fair to say it was uninspiring. I think would be the call on that. You have Zach Martin, who's a future Hall of Famer, retire. You've got Dak coming off the back of a season-ending injury now, heading into a new season. So I suppose the question has to be, RJ, are Cowboys fans panicking right now with the current situation?
I think this is one of those things where if you're looking from outside, I understand that perspective, but if you're in here, you're pretty used to the dysfunction and you're pretty used to the calamity. And so by some measures, it certainly is a scary offseason, especially with the retirement of Zach Martin. I mean, you're entering into a deep unknown. And you mentioned Dak. He's coming off of another injury that cost him a season. And I think it's unfortunate, but it's fair to wonder whether or not he's injury prone, whether or not you can rely on him for a total season at this point in time. But that being said, last year was just, I mean, I've been covering this team professionally for about a decade now, and I've been a fan of them my entire life. And last year was arguably, I would say, the most toxic season that they have ever had. And that was completely self-induced, obviously by way of the all-in comment and doing absolutely nothing in free agency, and then just continuing to stir the pot as the year went on and on and on. And so in some respects, the Cowboys, they were active in free agency. The last 2 years in 2023 and 24, they were the last team to sign a veteran free agent. This year, they were among the first, and they didn't even wait for the new league year to officially happen. They got some things done in the legal tampering window. They executed 2 veteran trades in that time period for Kyer Elam and Kenneth Murray. They added a third, obviously trading for Joe Milton as of late. So um, we are very used to living in garbage. You know what I mean? And right now, we cleaned up one room of the house. And so it feels kind of nice. I know it's a sad kind of coping way to look at things, but the darkest part of the night does feel behind us. So in
No,
that
it does
respect,
make
it
sense.
feels
And I wonder,
positive, if that makes
therefore,
sense.
when you look ahead to the draft and its importance, you mentioned their free agency. There wasn't any big splashy moves, but bringing back, say, Dante Fowler is a nice bit of business. And they maybe look to focus more on the defensive side of the ball than the offense. I know, obviously, a couple of running backs come in, Javonte Williams and Miles Sanders, and we'll get onto the running back position. But when you assess then 10 picks in this draft, the ability that they have a real war chest almost of picks here that they can bring some quality into the roster and find some really nice talented pieces. How important is this draft, especially for a first-time head coach in Brian Schottenheimer?
Yeah, I think it's essential. It's critical in a lot of ways because every year we get to this time of year and I'll tweet out the first round picks the Cowboys have made over the last decade. And on paper, it looks great. It looks like they've had a lot of success in the first round. And I would offer
Mm.
that that's really not that hard to do, right? Last year there was the weird criticism of Howie Roseman of just, drafting dudes that are, kind of available in mock drafts and things like that. So to that point, I think your average NFL fan who, has access to the internet could probably, land a legitimate player in the first round. But it's these, not even, later in the draft. The Cowboys have been horrible in the second round. They've been pretty bad in the third round. And because of those things, they haven't had the quality depth along their roster for when players like Dak are getting injured. Obviously, Dak is a unique thing because he plays the quarterback position, but they haven't been able to survive something like Trayvon Diggs getting injured or Deron Bland not being available at the start of last season. And so they're a very, very, very top-heavy roster. And if you don't want to be active in free agency, we have what I think are fair criticisms of that disposition, but then you really have to nail the draft. And if you're not doing either of those things, then you're just kind of floating in the abyss. So if you really want Brian Schottenheimer to succeed, and I would say the rage behind that hiring has finally subsided, you have to give him a fair shot, and you have to start.
Will he be
obviously,
given a fair shot, do you think? I know obviously we saw with Mike McCarthy, he was given plenty of time. It looked like he was even going to be staying in the building. But do you have trust in the Jones family that they will give him an adequate amount of time to be able to bring some stability to this organization potentially?
I think that they'll give him the time from the perspective of they do not fire head coaches. And that's, we hear that about teams like the Pittsburgh Steelers as an example, but some of that is just because they know that things will work out. The Cowboys don't like to do it because they don't want to pay people to not work for them. That's what you have to do, when you fire somebody. And so I think that Brian Schottenheimer will get the life of his contract, obviously, which is, fair and legitimate, I suppose. But it's dangerous to hope with this team in a lot of ways. I mean, Lucy's always going to pull that ball out. It's felt that way for a very long time. But if we are examining things from an objective standpoint and looking at the facts of the matter as they have been laid out in the Brian Schottenheimer era, which is microscopically small, something that, maybe doesn't really hit with somebody who doesn't follow the Cowboys. During the NFL Combine, obviously every head coach and general manager speaks up and takes the podium and offers thoughts and handles questions, et cetera, et cetera. Jerry Jones never does that as far as general manager duties are concerned. He sits on the Cowboys bus. They have a charter bus that makes the drive out to Indianapolis, and he kind of holds court there. He didn't do that this offseason. In fact, he has really not spoken much this offseason. He spoke at the owners' meetings and had, a silly comment about not knowing the name of Micah Parsons' agent. Kind of, can't help himself ultimately. But I would say that this is the least amount that the Joneses have compromised a season by mid-April. I recognize the bar is on the ground at this point in time, but normally by this point, they've already done a lot to set things back. So again, in that respect, it does kind of feel like they're, I don't want to say turning a new leaf, but I do think that the noise has gotten to them. I think that, I'm not naive enough to say they're finally going to change, but I think that they understand that some of the things that they were going about with are not really well perceived among their fan base, and they don't want to.
So on to the draft then, I mentioned 10 picks. None of those are in the fourth round, of course, because of the Jonathan Mingo trade, but 10 picks all in all is still plenty to work with. And I think we've seen, especially in the last 4 drafts, the Cowboys being willing in 2 of them to trade back. I just wanted to start with getting your thoughts on whether you think that's a very real possibility once again. Currently in the first round with the 12th overall pick, Stephen Jones has recently said that he'd be very open to, thinks there's still plenty more quality in the draft that will allow him to do that. Is that something you see the Cowboys doing come next week?
Yeah, I think that they would like to, just because, if you look at their positional needs and you look at the way the board is likely going to fall, obviously anything can happen that can change the direction of a draft on a moment's notice, but it stands to reason that they will have options at 12. Now, you mentioned that the trade backs over the last few years. Last year, they moved back from 24 to 29 because they liked a lot of the tackle options that were on the board, and they felt confident that one was still going to be available at 29, and he was. It was Tyler Guyton. I think the more comparable example is 4 years ago in 2021. They were originally selecting at 10 overall, And every mock we did at that point in time was, okay, they're going to take J.C. Horn or Patrick Surtain. One of them is going to be there. And, Surtain goes 8 to the Broncos, Horn goes 9 to the Panthers. And, that night, I vividly recall everybody on Twitter is freaking out, trade back, trade back, trade back. And they did. They moved back, but they were able to move back because amazingly, they traded with Philadelphia. They really wanted Devontae Smith, and they wanted to leapfrog the New York Giants to get him. Obviously, that worked out for them. It worked out for Dallas in that they still landed Micah Parsons. But in between them, at 11 overall that year, the New York Giants were picking. And after they got sniped for Devontae Smith, they said, well, we don't want to be here either. And Justin Fields was falling. And thankfully, the Giants had a caller in the Chicago Bears. And I think that's what it's really going to have to take for the Cowboys to be able to move back. If Shedeur Sanders manages to fall, if somebody is that in love with Jackson Dart, clearly I already mentioned the Pittsburgh Steelers, but they have a need at the quarterback position. Maybe they feel like they have to come up. That would be the ideal situation, in my opinion. I can't really imagine there's a non-quarterback that somebody's that desperate to go up and get. But, in that respect, it can happen. And again, it did happen that particular
Yeah, you're right. It does feel like even though
Fields.
there's a lot of quality, there's a lack of maybe blue chip caliber players, which are, like you say, they're the quarterbacks. It
Right.
looks like the likes of, by the first 4 picks, we're going to see Abdul Carter, Travis Hunter, those guys are going to be gone. So it is going to be difficult for teams to potentially trade down if there's no one really wanting to come in. Looking at then the wide receiver position, because that's the position that has mainly been mocked to the Cowboys at pick 12. You've got the options there of Tetairoa McMillan, of Matthew Golden, of Emeka Egbuka, as well as just some of the names there. Clearly, people feel like and the Cowboys clearly feel as well, they need a complement to CD Lamb in that offense and to give Dak another outlet. I just wondered, of those names right there, whether you think wide receiver would be the likely pick at 12 for the Cowboys, and of those options, or maybe there's somebody else, what do you think suits the Cowboys best? Is it one of these, like a big guy with the frame of McMillan, who's a big jump ball guy and he's going to be a contested catch kind of guy? Or is it going to be somebody who is a bit more of a slot and a field stretcher like an Egbuka or a Golden?
I think it would be fascinating to see them make a choice between them. I think the probably best overall result is a trade back and you still land Egbuka and you feel like you got your playmaker and you picked up some extra draft capital to work with. But that would obviously mean, by that point in time that at least Ted McMillan would be off the board. Maybe Matthew Golden's still hanging out. Maybe he's gone, whatever. But it would be fascinating to watch them choose just because it would give us an indication as to how Brian Schottenheimer views this offense. We still don't have a full and total idea. For my money's worth, if it were me making that pick and I did have the choice, I would lean Ted McMillan, which is difficult for me as an Arizona State Sun Devil. But he is that big body dude, and they really have been missing that since Dez Bryant, obviously, and that's very clearly his comp. It feels like CD and Dez Bryant played together. I think for your average football fan, they did not. There was no crossover there, and so you're right. I mean, there's zero doubt that they have to get some sort of running mate for CD to kind of work with and thrive with. And we know that CD can line up anywhere and have success. And so that's why if they want to draft Matthew Golden or if they trade back or whatever the case, if they're just that in love with Egbuka, I think that, they can make anything work. I trust the offense and I trust Dak Prescott. But I really do think that we've seen this team at times, granted it was under a different play caller, years in the past. They did, even when they were really successful in 2023 offensively, they did struggle in the red zone and they didn't have, that big body, just kind of what Dez was for a long time. And so I think they're missing that. And that would be the direction. I know that, things don't totally work out all the time, with players like that. I think the Chargers would offer that, or Chargers fans at least would offer that. But that just feels like the safest, highest floor
another
position
that is of real importance, I suppose, is cornerback right now for the Cowboys. You look at Daron Bland being a free agent next year, but you need to pair him alongside, Trayvon Diggs right now. There's a lot of talk about whether he's going to be ready to go come the start of the season. Jordan Lewis has obviously left in free agency. So I wonder about the cornerback position. We've seen in recent years, it feels like with the draft, people who mock cornerbacks and to go in the first round with Joey Porter Jr. or with Cooper DeJean, and they end up slipping to the second round. Even Quinyon Mitchell going towards the end of the first last year to the Eagles. Are you hopeful then that maybe one of these guys who is seen as a bit of a top prospect in the cornerback position, a Will Johnson or a Jahdae Barron, may slip and actually may fall into the Cowboys' hands in the second round then, and they manage to pick up a player of real talent without taking him in the first round?
Yeah, I think the only name that would merit real consideration in the first round is Will Johnson right now, but obviously people feel some passionate ways, about him in different directions. And so I think that, for me, the dream top 100 pick world for the Cowboys is they walk away with a brand new, forget names for a second, but a brand new wide receiver, corner, and running back. And if you do every, mock draft that you can and assess every kind of amalgamation of the order that you can, I think the best ultimately is if you go wide out, corner, running back. And some people like in the second round jumping on Travion Henderson, or maybe you think you have to pay that price for Quinshon Judkins, his teammate, or something like that. But ultimately, I'm with you. I think that even if it isn't one of those dudes falling, even if it just doesn't work out that way, if it's a Jacob Parrish you have to take, I still think that you have identified your core needs and you've walked away from the first two rounds with serious players who can help you. You mentioned Trayvon Diggs. I think there's a question. It's possible, is maybe a better way to put it, that both he and Deron Bland are not on the team next year. We've been arguing that they should extend Deron Bland, but when you argue that they should extend somebody, at the soonest possible moment, you're kind of screaming at a brick wall these days. That being said, he technically is entering the final year of his deal at the moment, and Trayvon Diggs is kind of a question mark because he's got some injury concerns, and it's been a tough go for him since he did sign his extension. So they really are on the verge of potentially having to reset at corner at large, which is why I would be stunned if they do get out of the second round without one of them.
I mentioned earlier on maybe about a lack of real true blue chip caliber players, but I know that the Cowboys haven't traded up since 2012, and Stephen Jones recently said, whether the feeling would be there to actually do it on the day or not, it's probably unlikely. But I just wondered from your perspective, you mentioned there the running back position. If somebody like Ashton Genty, who a lot of people believe will go within the top 6 picks, if he manages to slip out of the top 6, is there real potential that the Cowboys could be working the phones, say looking to trade up potentially to 7th overall with the Jets to go and get their running back who could be one of their franchise guys for however long and be a real great player for this organization?
I understand why it's easy to connect them to that. And this is a team that has been, I was going to say all over the running back spectrum, but that's not even true. They've just been at the polar opposites, right? They spent the 4th overall pick and then doubled down with the extension, and then treated it like it completely didn't matter, which obviously is a level of discourse on the internet. They are not a team that invests at the running back position. I recognize what their reputation is, but their challenge, if you want to call it that, and I say that respectfully, this offseason was to replace Rico Dowdle, who was an undrafted free agent who finally got a shot with them, after several years of waiting in the wings. And their immediate courses of action were to sign Javonte Williams and Miles Sanders, who you mentioned. Like, they seem very comfortable having a stable of would-be cast-off options to kind of just, have it all work like that. I mean, sort of a la Kyle Shanahan and the glory days of what we've seen this Niners team kind of accomplish prior to trading for Christian McCaffrey. And so I just can't see it. I mean, I truly can't. I think, it would not be worth it. It would be such a devastation. It would be such a step backwards from a value system standpoint of them, not understanding how premium these assets are. We've seen them, again, act and behave so haphazardly relative to doing things in an efficient manner, relative to building their roster. And this would be, I mean, they'd really lose a lot of people. But to that point, I do think, I also say this respectfully, there are a lot of Facebook fans that follow the Cowboys and people who just kind of, are able to be herded like cattle. And I think those people would really kind of scream and jump. And on some level, I've thought about this many times. This is a team and an ownership group who built their kingdom, on the shoulders of a workhorse running back, of a star running back. And so I understand the, kind of deep psychological, need to flock in that direction like they did with Zeke. But I do think that there are enough smart people in that room to, strap down the decision makers.
Well, I suppose another scenario then that I'm just trying to understand in this situation whether I'm crazy or not. So hear me out, RJ. But in this moment where Micah Parsons' contract negotiations rage on, and it feels like they are coming very close to some form of understanding there. And the fact that Micah Parsons is at the workouts right now, I think goes to say a lot. But just in that situation there, and I know we've seen crazy things happen in the draft before, but could there be some scenario where the Cowboys look to maybe invest for the future at that 12th overall pick, where they maybe think we need some insurance policy if this doesn't pay off with Micah Parsons, whether he was to leave? Do we look at an edge rusher? Because you can never have too many. Or do you look at an off-ball linebacker, a Jalen Walker, or a Shamar Stewart at edge rusher? Is there potential that they could do that, however minimal it potentially could be?
I mean, from an entertainment standpoint, I would love to kind of walk with you, but this is not a deep roster by any stretch. So I don't mean to insinuate that, but edge rusher is kind of one of their less shallow points of the roster. Obviously, Micah kind of leads the group, and DeMarcus Lawrence left in free agency in a rather loud fashion, but they spent a second-round pick on Marshawn Needham last year, so they still got him, obviously, kind of feeling like they just touched that position with a legitimate resource. Sam Williams was a second-round pick a couple of years ago, and granted, he's coming off of the torn ACL. He's somebody who they have given opportunities to in the past, and, who I imagine they believe is going to be a part of the overall rotation under Matt Eberflus. They obviously brought back Dante Fowler. You mentioned that, and he's going to command some time and attention. It doesn't seem like it would really work out. If they hadn't drafted Marshawn Nealon last year, if they'd spent, I don't know, just your random 6th-round pick on somebody and he was struggling to make the roster, I think there would be some life there. But right now, it just seems like they've just addressed it. You know what I mean? And it feels like they probably feel it's time to look at other positions because they're getting a little bit.
And just final question from me, RJ. Really, really appreciate your time. Looking at that first round pick then in the 12th overall, do you have a preference on what position group you would use there? We've mentioned there wide receiver. We've mentioned corner. We've mentioned maybe if they wanted to fortify the offensive line with Zach Martin's departure. Is there a position group that you think you would use that pick on to get the most value and to suit the team best for its potential need?
Honestly, I think it's wide receiver, and I think that they have acted that way to this point in the offseason. When it began, they had a lot of needs. And from a quantitative standpoint, they have addressed most of them. Now, Zach Martin's retirement is its own unique thing and its own unique challenge. But fortunate as it is to watch him walk away forever, the reality is he hasn't been Zach Martin on the field in a bit of time. And so I don't mean to say that they're improved without him, but I don't think that the drop off is kind of what, the standard person would kind of think of it in their head. So I feel like the offensive line is got a duct tape and glue situation that could be held together, at least for this year. They had a huge need at linebacker, but we saw them, like I said, trade for Kenneth Murray and sign Jack Sanborn in free agency. So again, from a quantitative standpoint, they addressed it. Corner is a need. Obviously, we mentioned it, and you talked about Jordan Lewis leaving. They did trade for Kyer Elam. As I fight off a sneeze, oh my gosh, I beat it. Shout out to me.
Nice save.
Nice, little. Who was it?
Quinnen Williams.
Yeah, who was it that blessed himself? Man. Yeah, thank you. That was a Quinnen Williams sort of move. That being said, they did address corner by trading for Kyer Elam. They had a need at defensive tackle when the offseason began. They were able to bring back Osa Digizua. They also brought in Solomon Thomas. So, again, we're looking at some kind of patchwork here. Nothing that you feel tremendous about. This is not a team that can challenge Philadelphia right now. But the lone area that they haven't really touched is wide receiver. And I say that, I promise I mean full respect to everybody who's associated with the team, but they did sign Paris Campbell. And so I don't mean to say or intimate that was nothing because I wish him well, but it isn't really a needle moving sort of move. And so that's the one area. And they let Brandon Cooks leave, obviously, to New Orleans. So they have to replenish there. And it feels like they did everything they did. They generally to some level telegraph what they're going to do in the first round, and it seems obvious that they knew and understood that one of Ted McMillan or Matthew Golden was
RJ, it's always a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you so much for joining us on talkSPORT End Zone. Just finally, before I let you go, let everyone know how they can find out the great work that you're doing with blogging the boys to make sure they are across everything come next week for the draft and everything Cowboys as well going forward.
Of course, I appreciate it. Bloggingtheboys.com is obviously where you can read all of my content and that of our wonderful staff. I'm on most levels of social media at RJ Ochoa. And while I am across the pond from an audio standpoint, I am a Manchester United supporter. So I am that guy that roots for the Cowboys and Man United. And so it hasn't been a whole lot of fun for me as of late.
Well, I'm a Chelsea and a New York Jets fan. So trust me, we're in the same boat here. Don't worry. We're almost similar. RJ, it's been great speaking with you. Thank you so much. Look forward to catching up soon, my man.